look at the whole aspect of digital business, for Gartner, it has really been a 3-year evolution. The first year, 2 years ago, we really established the foundation for digital business, which at the time we called the nexus of forces, which was the 4 forces of cloud, mobile, social, and information, which in Indian parlance we call SMAC, I guess. The second year was about using that foundation to conceptualize what is digital business, why is it important, how is it changing industries, etc. And this year we really focused on executing on digital business. So that's been the 3-year journey for our digital business story. The reason digital business is important for Indian enterprises, especially Indian enterprises, is the whole digital business paradigm has come up not because there's now suddenly a new technology available, but because customers increasingly are living in the digital world. And if you look at Indian demographics, with I think some statistics suggest that over 70% of Indian population in the next 3 years will be under the age of 25, these kids don't live in the analog world, they live in the digital world. And if you're a company that is selling products and services to them, unless you're able to sell to them and interact with them and develop those relationships in the digital world, it's not going to happen. The same thing is happening in Indian enterprises with their employee base. If you look at the average employee age in let's say a non-manufacturing Indian enterprise, it's significantly lower than the global counterparts. So that's the other reason where this is a young employee pool that has grown up with digital technologies, and this concept in digital business that is gaining a tremendous amount of momentum now is the digital workplace. Just as digital business affects external customers, the digital business transforms how employees, the knowledge workers, work within the company. So it's these 2 reasons why I believe digital business is very critical for Indian enterprises. The way companies need to focus on building digital business, first is you start with the definition. Gartner's definition of digital business is an enterprise's approach to creating new digital designs or business models by blurring the physical and digital worlds. So if you look at that 1-sentence definition, first place to start is interpret what that means in the context of your industry and in the context of your company. If you're a bank, a large-scale bank like a State Bank of India, that answer to what that means will be different than if you're a manufacturing organization like Maruti Suzuki. So figuring out what the definition means in the context of the industry you operate in, what your customer profile is, and what they expect from you from a customer experience perspective, that is the first aspect. The second aspect is the nuance of how do you blur the physical and digital is really about integrating people, business, and things. The people and business has been well understood in the whole e-business paradigm. What is changing very rapidly now is the addition of things. We are projecting that in 2009, going from the number in 2009, where we had just under 1 billion things that were in this Internet of Things environment, that number by 2020 is going to go to 30 billion. Now these 30 billion things that are always or intermittently connected have the intelligence to not just sense, but evaluate, respond, and actually make decisions. This is where the integration with the digital business story needs to happen. If you're an auto manufacturer, how do you integrate all of the onboard instrumentation and sensors so you can do things like remote diagnostics? You can do things like this car has been in an accident, and this Mercedes does this in a production S series now. If your car is in an accident, immediately a person knows that in their kind of contact center. They will, a friend of mine experienced it, they will shut down the fuel, shut down the engine. I will ask you, do you need us to contact anyone? They will put in the call to the emergency response folks, all within seconds of that accident happening. This is really where, you know, their take at using the digital business paradigm to improve the customer experience. So that is the other aspect of how you articulate where is the value for us in either improving the customer experience, increasing revenue, or both, and as a result, growing market share, growing customer loyalty, etc. That is where the articulation of what the digital business paradigm means for your enterprise has to be done. Then if you look at the third aspect of digital business, which are the technologies that will drive this evolution, there are two core sets of technologies. One is what we talked about earlier as the nexus of forces, because those are still the enabling technologies on which digital business will be built. It is the mobile as the default device on which information access happens. Increasingly, many companies are actually stopping their web-based applications and going only mobile, because they say 90% of our access, of our search, of our commerce is happening on the mobile. Why do we spend on maintaining that 10% that happens on the web? So that is a tremendous shift of focus. And of course, then you have the social and the cloud and the information as key elements of that technology grouping. The other broad technology family that will impact digital business is what I called in the Internet of Things family. These are devices that will now have the sensors built into them that will not just sense and respond, but sense, evaluate, respond, and take decisions. So it's these two families of technologies that will fundamentally transform how enterprises leverage digital business. The way an organization should go about measuring digital success really starts with what were the drivers for which they actually adopted or went down the digital business path. So it really depends on what is your burning platform that drove you to adopt digital business. If it is a new competitor, then have you been able to push back that competitor? If it is loss of revenue, have you been able to get that revenue? If it's loss of market share, have you been able to get that market share? The bottom line is that measure has to be very external centric, not within the enterprise, but really what are the measures of business success that really drove you to adopt digital business. If you look at the Indian aspect of going digital, I think this is a story that is still unfolding. In terms of companies adopting it. So I wouldn't want to name any clients and say these are the gold standards, but some indicators are some of the e-business, the Flipkarts, the Jabongs. Jabong is a classic example in my view of someone that inherently has adopted a lot of the digital business principles in terms of things like their ability to map based on how much time you spend on their site, what you're doing, where you're going, whether you bought, didn't buy. They actually create a very strong behavioral pattern, seems to, looking at it from the outside, which then allows them to interrupt so one example that I experienced personally, and this is a fundamental aspect of our perception of or our definition of digital business, which is called a business moment. And a business moment is defined as those opportunities that occur sporadically that you have to leverage dynamically. So I experienced a business moment, for example, with Jabong, where I spent about 5-10 minutes looking for a cable. I couldn't find it. I was about to exit, and as I was about to exit, an online agent came up, and she said, "This is a live person that came up online." She said, "Looks like you couldn't find what you're looking for. Can I help you?" So I told her what I was looking for. She found it for me. I placed the order. So that was like 300, 400 rupees. But now take that 300, 400 rupees times maybe the thousands of people that search for things and exit without actually placing an order. That is a huge revenue opportunity. And that is a classic example of the business moment and using technology. So obviously there's a lot of technology that goes into it. They're tracking I'm searching for something. They're tracking the fact that I couldn't find it. They're tracking the fact that I'm exiting or trying to exit. And they insert this agent in that process. And then giving her, in this case, the tools to search for what I couldn't find in a more elaborate manner, and then the business processes to allow her to order it on my behalf and get it to me in a reasonable time frame. So this is where the end-to-end business processes, the business model that they've adopted, and then leveraging that business moment, Jabong, in my view, would be one best practice example. But I think the future is to look at some of the traditional enterprises and say, how do they convert themselves into digital businesses? And that is still a work in progress in India. When you look at going digital and implementing IT, one is a subset of the other. Though the notion of implementing IT in a digital business context is very different. If you want to be successful with digital business, you cannot implement IT in a business as usual fashion, which is where we have defined this new paradigm called bimodal IT, where the premise is that in order to be successful in digital business, and if you look at digital business, the emphasis is on the word business, not on the word digital, but digital is a part of that paradigm. And the reality is that in order to be successful with digital business, again with the emphasis on business, you have to get the digital part right, because that is 80% of all of the things that impact the business elements. So in that context, IT and increasingly T, just technology, not just information technology, is a critical element of success. But if we continue to implement IT as we have in the last 30 to 40 years, it will fail. So what we have proposed is that in a digital business context, IT needs to adopt this bimodal approach. Mode 1 is the traditional run the business, architectural, stable, foundational elements of IT. But mode 2 is something that operates at the pace of business. You have very different approaches, very different skills and competencies that you bring to bear. The governance and the funding mechanisms are very different. So all of that has to be created as a mode 2 capability, which is really about identifying business opportunities where you don't understand quite how to leverage that opportunity, but you do the mode 2 in an experimentation mode. So the tagline for mode 2 is try fast, fail fast. IT is a critical aspect of it, the business side is a critical aspect of it. So how do you put those two together to really say we need to, by tapping this new market segment, we need to grow revenue by 5%. And this is a real example that a CIO in Delhi told me. That was one of the mode 2 examples that he leveraged. So their goal was, if we did this app and put it in the hands of our customers, we would have more customer traction, and their goal was 5 crores of incremental revenues in 2 quarters. So the point was that if your framework is 2 quarters, and in the traditional mode of IT, it takes you 2 years to deliver an application, it's pointless. So they did this project in mode 2. It took them about 2 weeks to put the app together. It was actually an app, not an application. And so now the implementing IT is a very different setup. Your standard run the business implementation of IT continues as usual. The mode 2 implementation of IT becomes a series of very short projects that have very strong business outcomes, usually connected to the end customer in terms of how do we touch them, and getting this as a running in a business as usual mode is really how do you implement bimodal within the IT sector. So that is where the two are connected.